Hi, Kristen.
Jay.
Yeah, we're in the you. Well, good evening. It's 5:30, May 19th, 2021, and welcome to the Lane Transit District Board of Directors regular meeting. Thank you everyone for taking the time to be here on this rainy evening. I'm just going to start with roll call. Joshua Scove.
Here.
Thanks, Josh. And then we have Don Norden. All right, I do not see Don yet. We will make a note when he joins. Emily Secord. Okay, Emily is absent. Michelle Weber.
Here.
Thank you, Michelle. And Susan Cox.
Present.
Thank you, Susan. And Stephen yet let us know in advance that he will not be in attendance tonight. So we knew that Stephen would be absent. Well, we have 4 of us, so that's what we're gonna do tonight then. Great, well, let's start off with comments from board president. And I just wanna draw your attention very quickly to an email that I sent out about engaging in the conversation when we have board member reports. Really, it's my expectation that if you serve on a committee, that you work together with those committee members that are also LTD board members to decide who is going to be reporting out and what's the content. We really need to have better participation and sharing what the committees do, as those do serve as advisory bodies to this board. And that should also help shape some of the conversations we're having. And just so the public knows, this was an email that was also sent out so that we know the appropriate time to be discussing what's happening in committee meetings. And I will draw attention specifically to the contract committee. I do want to make a quick note, both Emily and Dawn have now joined at 5:32. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to AJ for comments from the general manager.
Good evening, board president and board and members of the public. I do want to announce today that as we're moving forward out of the COVID environment, although still very much in it, we are having conversations about resuming some of our traditions at LTD. One of them being recognizing our employees, or at the very least, announcing the recognition of our Employee of the Month. So what I want to announce today is that we went back and we looked at nominations that we had and evaluated them and retroactively selected an Employee of the Month for February, March, and April. And this evening on the next item, we will have an Employee of the Month for May. We will not do a formal presentation here as we did. It does become a little awkward sometimes. And we don't want to have that. What we are doing is recognizing our Employee of the Month at our internal meeting that we have with all employees. Those meetings are recorded and are played and are accessible by all of our LTD employees so that our Employee of the Month is appropriately recognized. So with that said, I apologize, my dog just saw a squirrel. Which is our previous conversation. Our Employee of the Month for February was Transit Safety Officer George Denley. George Denley was acknowledged by a transit operations supervisor. They worked together to handle a crisis of an individual on board our buses who was having a mental breakdown. He was able to calm that individual down, show a lot of compassion, and de-escalate the situation. So his fellow coworker was so impressed that he nominated, because that was really outside. Typically, we would just monitor and allow professionals to come in, but he was able to really show him a level of compassion that is worth mentioning, and that was for February. In March, Transit Operations Supervisor Rebecca Bailey was recognized by one of her coworkers for just having a great attitude and really cheering on, commending, and encouraging operators to keep working. She is on an assignment as what we call the COVID supervisor. That means she's evaluating all the operation out there. And as you know, we have a lot of regulatory protocol, but with the way she's handling it is with a positive attitude. and really as an encouraging versus kind of saying you need to be doing that. And it was really appreciated by everybody. And in April, Sunny Melhorn, who's our facility specialist, he's being recognized also by a coworker for having a great attitude in dealing with emergencies. There was some transitioning of staff, and he responded to some different facility emergencies with just a great attitude. And that included on the weekend. So even during this pandemic, everybody's really stepping up. And we wanted to make sure that we recognize those individuals who really are worth recognizing. So that's February, March, and April. So kudos to them.
That's awesome. Big round of applause for all of those employees. And I do see Sunny over in our attendee list. So thanks for being here, Sunny, and awesome job to the other employees that were recognized this evening. So thanks for sharing that, AJ. Let's hop right over to announcements and additions to agenda. Is there anything that board members have this evening?
May I say that May that was the next agenda item, so I didn't mention our current employee of the month?
Oh yeah, we will hop right back to that as soon as we clear up this agenda item. But it also looks like no one has any announcements or additions. So go ahead, AJ, and why don't you do the May employee of the month?
Okay, and staying on the additions to the agenda or changes, I do want to announce that my GM update will be an information only. It will not require board action. So when we get to that item, I'll remind you guys about that again.
Thank you.
Yes, and now moving to our May employee of the month. That's our current employee that's being recognized for the work that he's been doing, not only through the pandemic, but for this month, really taking on 2 roles. Due to an absence in his department, John Allen, who is our human resource specialist, and he has been filling in, not just managing the regular work that he does, but helping us also with our MTM contract, Medicaid reconciliation, and really just wearing 2 jobs, and really with a great attitude, and putting in a lot of hours, and just really with a great attitude. So we really want to commend him. And he was also recognized by his employees for just fellow employees for just really wearing those 2 hats so seamlessly, and so just so you know, we are hiring for that position. So we're not going to continue to require that of him. But in the meantime, he's had a great attitude, and we really think that he deserves recognition. As you guys know, he comes before you guys different times and does an amazing job at really breaking down really complicated regulatory things and how our service functions, and makes it easy to understand. So I know you guys all know John Allen.
Big round of applause for John. So John, we see you over in the attendee side. And this is what's so tough about Zoom, is that we can't get to share a smile or a pat on the back or a round of applause. But John, thank you so much for your dedication to LTD in numerous ways. And we do enjoy interacting with all the different employees. And it's been nice to get to know John and the work that he's doing. So awesome, awesome job. So thank you for sharing about that. We're going to move on to audience participation, and I'm going to turn it over to Camille.
Thanks, Caitlin. Okay, I'm just going to read the instructions really quickly for anyone who hasn't already heard them. To indicate you would like to provide public testimony, please use the raise your hand button. For those attending via phone only, press *9 on your phone to raise your hand. When it's your turn to speak, your name will be called. For those attending via phone, last 4 digits of your phone number will be called. Please state your name, city of residence, and who you are representing for the audio record. Once you have provided testimony, your hand will be lowered. Please don't raise your hand again. We're only providing 1 opportunity to speak. And for those who are unable or do not want to publicly speak, testimony may also be provided via email at clerk@ltd.org. Public testimony is limited to 3 minutes per community member, and a timer will be displayed on the screen and will beep when your 3 minutes is up. And I am showing 3 people wanting to provide public testimony. Give me just one moment here while I show the timer. Okay, first up, we have Rob Zako. Rob, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Camille. Thank you, members of the LTD Board of Directors. I have to say it's a little bit unnerving speaking to a timer and not seeing anybody's faces, but so be it in this time of Zoom. I'm Rob Zako, Executive Director of Better Eugene Springfield Transportation. We see that you have the budget documents on your consent calendar this month for approval. Given that you're not intending to discuss them, we won't have anything to say about those either. We recognize that we're still in an uncertain time of COVID-19 and it's hard to predict the future, and so have nothing to say about that. I will, however, talk more broadly about money, and I want to start with a quote. In this age, in this country, public sentiment is everything. Without it, nothing can fail. Against it, nothing can succeed. And as you may know, the quote comes from Abraham Lincoln. I mention that because BEST is involved in transit funding issues at a national level. Over 3 COVID-19 relief packages, LTD got something like $75 million. And that was due to public support for those relief packages. It was what was enabled Congress to pass those and move those forward. And BEST certainly pleased and grateful that that happened. Earlier today, we had some conversations. BEST was involved with some of the same people talking to Congressman DeFazio about the Federal Transportation Reauthorization Bill and looking to see if it might be possible to include funding for transit operations, continuing what was done with the COVID-19 relief packages. It remains to be seen whether that can happen or not. But frankly, it comes down to what Lincoln said. If there's public support for that, members of Congress will vote for it, and we can see that. That could be a game changer for LTD. If that were to go through, there could be significantly more funding for operations coming from federal sources that would change transit tomorrow and the trade-offs between ridership and coverage. But without public support, that won't happen. Finally, a third example, which you will be considering next week. Moving Ahead, of course, is coming back for a reboot. And as we've seen in the past, our community can be pretty divided about whether or not to invest in more transit. It all comes down to public support, public opinion. So I would just say that BEST is supporting transit and the work that LT is doing. You have our support and opinion, and we're working with others to try to provide that as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rob. And next we have Linda Dugan. Linda, whenever you're ready.
Hello, I'm Linda Dugan. I've been a resident in Eugene since 1974. I'm speaking tonight myself, not for an organization. I personally have great concern for the direction LTD is headed, paying lots of money for outside consultants, some out of state, and continually focusing on substitute transportation for our neighborhood city. I will continue to advocate for neighborhood buses, public mass transit for everyone, so the disabled, some say alter-abled, elderly, bus dependent, low income, etc., can get from place to place in larger vehicles, soon all electric buses, hopefully. Offering people as a substitute, Arcimoto, paid driver for one passenger with no room for groceries, wheelchairs, canes, etc., with open sides, electric bikes, scooters, etc., cannot be a substitute for a bus. They can be additions, but not substitutes. I feel strongly LTD should not be in the business of providing these types of alternate mobility, paying for consulting firms for planning, managing these options, etc. LTD should be in the business of operating mass public transportation buses. This could include smaller buses, vans, etc., but not getting in the business of one-person electric transportation. I do think this type of single transportation should be set up and managed by the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Next, we have John Murray. John, whenever you're ready.
Hello, my name is John Quetzalcoatl Murray, a resident of Don Norden's subdistrict, speaking as an individual. Just want to
John, we're having a hard time hearing you.
public service. Thank you, John.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, there you go. Thank you.
Okay.
Norden for tirelessly meeting with us and helping us to participate in this process. That was how Jess and Rachel and Linda and Lucy and I first met 20 months ago and started our research and learned how over LTD's first 50 years, our Southeast neighborhood has evolved right along with LTD. We are one of LTD's great success stories. And the 2019 long-range plan to eliminate service here made no sense until these Southeast neighbors figured it out. It was the consultant. For that project, LTD brought in the rock star of the transportation consulting world, Jarrett Walker, his signature brand, the high-frequency grid. And so we got a plan for a high-frequency grid, but a mid-sized metro can only afford that high price tag if we eliminate outlying service, which meant the neighborhoods. We saw that the choice of consultant powerfully influenced the final plans. Tonight, you are being asked to hire a consultant for a mobility management strategy, a foundation for all future plans. The contract committee raised questions about this RFP process, and when I independently tried to find answers to those questions, it raised more questions, especially about the number of bids. And those questions cannot be legally answered until this RFP is closed. So I ask that you remove this item from the consent calendar and close the current RFP. I sent the technical details to Don, but the gist came from the contract committee. Before opening an RFP, provide an executive summary with the metrics that were requested by them, including the expected number of bids and a visual that shows your method for objective scoring. Because one consultant asked what LTD meant by creativity, which was one of the important scores, we could also provide greater clarity there for the next RFP. Because the future of transit in our neighborhood is so very important, the choice of this consultant is also very important. Don has all of our detailed suggestions. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, John. And Caitlin, I will hand it back to you. I'm not showing anyone else wanting to provide testimony.
Thanks, Camille. And thank you for those who provided public testimony tonight. Our next agenda item is board member reports. Who in this group is going to be reporting this evening? Don't all jump at once.
This is Emily. I just wanted to point out that there's a couple items on the consent calendar that came from the contract review committee. So I just want to make sure people are aware of that.
Thank you, Emily. And is there, since Stephen is not here this evening and he is the other contract committee board member, just really quick, is there anything that you want to say about those particular contracts?
Good question. I think there, one is for janitorial services, which are pretty straightforward and self-explanatory. I think the most important thing to remember with our contracts is that we do have a very robust process that the staff goes through before it gets to the contract review committee, and that all of our contracts we're talking about are going to be have the option to cancel at any time without penalty.
Thanks for that input, Emily. Appreciate that. And any other, anyone else speaking tonight?
I guess I just want to clarify. I don't know if anyone from the contract review committee wants to talk about this, but my sense is that the mobility management plan, what we've spec'd out in the RFP is very much, a bunch of things we want to explore as an agency, and like fits with a whole bunch of goals and the goals that we've articulated in the past. I don't think we need to pull it from the consent calendar. We sort of have seen the funding for this float in front of us a few times, but I just want to make sure that if there's anything to report from the contract review committee, that we should hear something about it now, just to, take seriously what we heard in public comment.
Josh, thanks for saying that. I'm sorry, I did forget to mention that part of the review. We did go through a lot of that information. Most of that is coming from STIF funding. So I think it's really important to remember we've already allocated budget items for this, and that it is grant funded for that majority.
Good question, Josh and Emily. Thank you for that reply. That's really helpful. I am just going to call attention really quick. We actually have the budget and the CIP and the long range financial plan under consent calendar. And that was a conscious decision that I worked with staff on putting that there, since we've already been through so many rounds of presentations and whatnot. So I just wanted to call attention to that. That was a intentional move. Dawn, you have your hand up.
Well, Josh just spoke about the contract committee and removing it or not removing it from the consent agenda. And we just had testimony from the members of Southeast Neighborhood requesting that be removed from the agenda. And I'm not certain. I mean, one of the issues they mentioned was like there were 65 different presenters for these contracts, and they chose the one group. And I don't have any further information about that from the, and I guess Andrew's going to make a presentation later, but I wouldn't want to make a further consideration about that issue until we have that presentation later in the agenda.
My response to that, Dawn, is I did attend that contract committee meeting just as a observer or attendee. And I would recommend all board members, if you read your board packet in advance and you feel like there's a particular item that you need more information on, it's I would say, take the initiative to watch the video of the contract committee, because that might clear up some questions, or it might make more questions. But that would be my recommendation, because I would just say personally felt like Emily and Stephen and other members of that committee did ask a lot of thorough questions, and it was very informative to watch that contract committee. But I appreciate you saying that, Dawn. Does anyone want to respond to Dawn?
Josh.
Yeah, so I guess to try to remind us of the appropriate process here, if we want to talk about something on the consent calendar, then someone should move to remove it from the consent calendar, and we can second that motion and we can vote on it. I think as a matter of governance and process, we have talked about the mobility management plan, and it's gone through a staff selection process, and that is staff. That's an example of staff acting on policy objectives that we have laid out at the board level. So I think there would have to be a reason to pull this from the consent calendar. I have something to say about the budget items very quickly, but let's handle that first. Don, are you moving to remove it from the consent calendar?
Well, I was requesting a little more discussion about it because we have concerned citizens who have been following this issue and have expressed a concern about how they're going to get service there. And I personally don't know the details of this. So unfortunately, I did not attend the contract committee meeting or that agenda item. So I don't have a specific request right now. From this, I'm feeling a different consensus from the other members who attended that. And Stephen's not there today. He had some questions that he expressed, and I know Emily expressed some. But I feel like those members who are in that committee feel okay about it, and I'm not well enough informed to request something other than that. So I won't pursue that now.
Yeah. Don, if it makes you feel better, I'm sorry, Josh, I think I might have cut you off there. We were very thorough about where the funds were coming from and where they were going. It doesn't make any solid decisions per se about any changes to what we're offering. It's a consultative process to determine what else we could be doing in addition to our current services. And if those funds aren't used, they can get reallocated or they just get lost for the cycle. So it's not that we're out anything. The district's not out anything if we don't move forward, except for the opportunity for this information and an opportunity to be innovative. Sorry, it's loud in the background.
I think it was
Working
just a
from
question
home.
about who chose, which contractor was chosen and what were the criteria for that. And, you know, the staff looked into it. I'm sure Andrew worked on that and made a good decision about that. But since we had a community concern, I thought I should bring that up and have a more thorough discussion about that than just let it go and rubber stamp it as we go by.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Don. I kind of feel bad for our staff. The contract review committee, I think, is pretty specific about, you know, trying to get into the details and make sure that this is appropriate and in the community's best interest. And I'm the last one who wants to spend dollars unnecessarily. So I feel like the staff has done a great job vetting this, and the contract review committee went into detail about why it was okay to bring it to the board. But I think it's always good to ask questions. So thank you.
Josh, do you want to touch on your thing about the budget?
No, I want to move adoption. Do you mind if I do that?
That'd be great.
I move adoption of LTD Resolution 2021-05-19-021. It's hereby resolved that the consent calendar for May 19, 2021 is approved as presented.
Thanks, Josh. Is there a second?
Susan.
I see Susan raise her hand and mouth second, so that I'll count that. All right, let's do a roll call vote. Let's start with Joshua Scove.
Aye.
Thank you, Josh. Don Norden.
Aye.
Thank you, Don. Emily Secord.
Aye.
Thank you, Emily. Michelle Weber.
Aye.
Thanks, Michelle. Susan Cox.
Aye.
And I vote aye, so that passes unanimously. Thanks for that discussion, everyone. That was great. And like I said, it's so great that we're recording all of our committee meetings now so that we can access those as we need to anytime from the comfort of our own home. All right, so as AJ mentioned, she is going to do a information only update. So AJ, you are up.
Thank you. As mentioned, this is information only. You might note that I continue to report on some of my monthly activity. You might have noticed by now it's pretty repetitive. It's a lot of standing committees, a lot still related to COVID-19, but a lot also related to the reopening going on. So just to let you know, I do know that the conversation continues about how will transit agencies strategize to welcome back riders. I know Chicago's got a big campaign coming on in the next few weeks. Every state's doing a little bit different and responding a little bit different. So know that at the national, at the state level, that's still a very pertinent conversation. And a lot of my meetings are related to that. The local meetings are a lot more related to my work on the nonprofit organizations and related to our partnerships with Eugene and Springfield. Some of you know we've started the conversation up, as mentioned earlier, about moving ahead and Main Street. So there's a lot of coordination. We're also talking about those challenges our community faces and where we have common interests. So a lot of meetings focused on that. I'm also reporting here on the different informations we've already presented before the board, like the rider campaign, the employee survey on the various goals. So you will see a lot of that in there. Tonight, you guys adopted the community investment plan, the long reach financial plan, and the budget that really speak to some of the concerns the board had about this year. How do we move forward, not just in this year, but in the future years with a healthy fiscal focus on that. So you will see that in some of my reporting here. And you'll also see some information about the decisions, as you know, that the board has approved about sustainability and how we make those big investments and electrifying our fleet over the next 3 years. So a lot of that type of information. And that is it. Any questions on all of that? If you don't have them today, but think about them later, it'd be great for us to discuss. I will be reporting again in June, which I believe is my last official report of this type for this performance review. So I want to make sure that I capture any input you have in any future report. So thank you.
I don't see any hands up. Was there anyone that wanted to respond to AJ?
I would just like to thank AJ for taking the time to provide us with these monthly updates. It's very helpful just to kind of see the progress or where we stand on these goals that have been set. And looks to me like you've been working really hard. So thank you for that too.
Have a great team, as you can probably imagine. Yeah, not a one-person show. Got a lot of people that are part of the team. Thanks.
Well, please pass on the words of gratitude to the team so they know that we're appreciative and we're recognizing the hard work that's being done. Let's go ahead and move on to our next agenda item, and that's the general manager evaluation, and that's going to be Kristen Denmark. And just as a reminder, the materials were a separate handout. They're not in your packet. Kristen?
Hi, thanks, Caitlin. So this agenda item is a discussion of the prior executive session. So I'm just going to go over it at a high level, really for members of the public. And then, of course, I'm happy to answer any questions. So several months ago, the board delegated authority to an ad hoc committee to make recommendations regarding the general manager's evaluation process for this fiscal year and future fiscal years. And the ad hoc committee has retained a consultant, TransPro, who has been helping LTD with the strategic plan and really working on, for this fiscal year, since we're so late in the game, making sure we understand how to objectively measure the goals that the board previously adopted, as well as some of the evaluation tools, making some recommendations for the actual form that the board will use and some questions on that form, as well as the general manager's self-evaluation. So the consultant has presented to the ad hoc committee in a lot of detail about some recommendations. Specifically, those recommendations were, and that presentation was attached in the handout. And there was objective criteria, a section for how to objectively define and measure the board adopted goals. And then a second recommendation from the consultant was regarding the evaluation tools, the form that the board will use, and the self-evaluation form. So the ad hoc committee recommended to the board that the board adopt those recommendations from the consultant. So that's the agenda item that is before the board tonight. In early discussions of the ad hoc committee, there was a recommendation regarding further board authority, delegated authority. But after discussion, we decided that we actually want to revise that part of the motion, remove it from the agenda item tonight because the ad hoc committee wants to have further discussion on that topic. So when the board gets to that point, we'll need to make sure the motion is amended to reflect just the items about this year's evaluation process.
Can I pause really quick? I need to make an apology. When we were doing board member reports, I skipped over SPC, and Leah was here to give her board member report. So I just want to acknowledge that that was my mistake and got caught up in the conversation. And Leah, I just want to apologize. So just quick side note, I'm very sorry about that. So sorry, Kristen, go ahead and.
No, I'm done with my part. So I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Okay, I don't see any hands up, but is there anyone that has questions or comments? Okay, I see Josh.
Oh, wait, should I talk? I didn't know if you were about to call on somebody else. Sorry.
No, there's no one else, so go for it.
Well, okay, so Kristen, that was a really good and clear summary. The only thing I would tack on is just, for the benefit of those watching who are not in the executive session, I think it was generally the view of those of us around the Zoom table that this felt a little silly, not silly, but it's like obviously just very late to be putting flesh on the bones of the goals that we had set for this half of the fiscal year, so late, even in this half of the fiscal year. But that we're really trying to gear up and improve our capacity for doing this for next year. And so I guess I just wanted to say, AJ, AJ, I don't want you to have any trepidation about our like moving the target or anything like that. At this point, we're really just trying to go through the process of getting better at setting detailed goals, using TransPro's guidance to really focus on policy level outcomes that are appropriate to the things we should set at the board level, and get good at that for the next time around, which is coming shortly, because the next fiscal year is almost here. So I don't know if anyone wants to sort of amend the sort of tone or substance there, but I just wanted to make sure that was clear to people. We're not sort of changing how we're evaluating AJ at the last second, and we're really just sort of looking ahead to being better at this since we've sort of fumbled the GM eval, I think, the last couple of times. I mean, I'll blame the pandemic for half of it, but own the other half.
Good summary, Josh and Kristen. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, I definitely want to note for everyone watching, the board's taking accountability for, as Josh said, kind of fumbling the GM evaluation. And thank you, AJ, for being agile as we did that. I do want to let everyone know, Stephen is in very much support of adopting the ad hoc committee's recommendations from TransPro. And so just making it known that Stephen is wanting to be in support of that. Okay, anyone else want to chime in on this?
Kristen, just from a process perspective, do you want to just help us make sure that we are striking the right part of the resolution as originally written?
I'm listening, yes. And I mean, I'm happy to do it, and someone can so move or someone can take a shot and I will correct you.
I like the "you do it and let us so move" for part of that statement.
Okay, so let me get my document up. So a board member could move to adopt resolution number 2021-05-19-029 with striking section 2 of the resolution that states delegates authority to the ad hoc committee to make recommendations regarding the general manager's contract starting July 1, 2022, so that there is one resolution which states adopts the recommendations of the ad hoc committee for fiscal year 2020-2021 general manager's evaluation process.
So moved.
I'll second that.
All right. Was that you, Michelle? You moved that one? Okay. And then
wait,
Emily
hold on.
second. Okay, great.
Just as we discuss it, the fourth whereas then is superfluous. Does that give you any grief, Kristen?
Where are you?
On the resolution.
No, it doesn't, because it's really what the resolution is at the bottom. So it's okay. Yeah,
Okay.
but thanks for asking.
Okay. All right. Let's do a roll call vote. We're going to start with Joshua Scove.
Aye.
Thank you, Joshua. Don Norden.
Aye.
Thanks, Don. Emily Secord.
Aye.
Thanks, Emily. Michelle Weber.
Aye.
Thanks, Michelle. Susan Cox.
Aye.
Thank you, Susan. And I also vote aye. So that also passes unanimously. Well, thank you for that clear, concise wrap up, Kristen. We really appreciate you doing that. And we appreciate all the work to help steer this ship. So thank you for that. We're very grateful. So, and we have a special board member in attendance tonight, Abe Secord. Welcome to the meeting. How do you vote, Abe? Hi. Okay, great. Okay, so let's keep going. We are doing awesome with time. Let me get back to my agenda. I have too many tabs open. I see Tiffany has hopped over. So Tiffany, here we go. Legislative and relief funding update. And this is just an information only presentation. So that's awesome. So thank you, Tiffany, for being here. We're so excited to hear from you. The floor is yours, my friend.
Well, thank you, Caitlin. And good evening, everybody. I'm Tiffany Edwards. I'm the Intergovernmental Relations Manager for LTD, and I know most of you. And for those of you who don't actually know what I do here at LTD, I manage the relationships with, I do the government relations. I manage relationships with the cities and the county and elected officials and our legislators and congressional delegation and state and federal agencies. So that's kind of what I do here. And then, of course, I'm tracking and managing the legislative issues at the state level and obviously as in Congress as well. So that is what I'm going to be talking to you today about. I don't have a PowerPoint to share. This is really just kind of a verbal update. But I do have a handout that you all should have received today, and I'll share that on my screen when I get to that. And that's up to date as of today. So I'm going to just provide a really high level overview of state legislation, and then I'm going to pause for some questions that you may have. And then after that, I'll move into a federal overview where I can then answer some questions on that side. So I will start here. The state legislature up in Salem convened on January 21st, and they're about 4 months into their 5-month session. They're hoping to wrap up by June 18th. That's a tentative date, but they do have until the June 28th as determined by the Oregon Constitution to conduct their business. Due to COVID, the Capitol up in Salem is closed to the public. So all of the meetings and hearings and everything that they've been doing, I've just like this, virtually. The only thing happening in person are floor votes that they're having a couple times a week. And that's actually just required so that each chamber is meeting separately to do those votes, to vote on bills that have made their way through committees. And so this session, there were over 4,000 bills introduced and on a very wide range of issues and topics, addressing COVID, wildfire relief, recovery, workplace regulations, housing, homelessness, climate change, taxes, all the normal stuff that we see in a normal legislative year, as well as additional COVID and wildfire legislation. I am very fortunate to work with a skilled and talented team up in Salem, that our lobby firm, who does a fantastic job of representing LTD on state legislative matters. And they really do help navigate not just the policies, but the politics that are happening. Our lobby team is in constant communication with, their other clients, with legislators, with lobbyists, and they really do know what's happening up there throughout the legislative process. LTD engages mostly through our association, the Oregon Transit Association, or OTA. So they also have a lobbyist that we work very closely with. And I hear locally in the city, with the city and cities and county, I collaborate with my counterparts at the cities of Eugene and Springfield and Lane County and their teams of lobbyists. And so many of those folks actually represent other transit agencies. So there's actually a lot of synergy happening, and we are able to keep on top of all different priorities and kind of know what everybody's working on. It's extremely productive to have so many eyes and ears on top of things. So that's nice. This is a very busy time because of a legislative session. And so there's a lot of political dynamics and need to be flexible and available for a lot of moving parts happening kind of constantly. So next year will be just a 1 month session. So this is actually just the busy time, and it happens every 2 years, and it's just the way it is. It's the nature of the work. So next long session will not be until 2023. So most of the bills that we determined that may have some impact to LTD are closely monitored, but there are a few priority bills that the OTA, Oregon Transit Association, took a formal position on, and LTD was engaged on those. And what that engagement looks like is generally just a lot of meetings with a lot of legislators who serve on the committees where they're having hearings on those bills. And my role is I share LTD's story on how those may impact us and provide context. And then I also meet and communicate with our local delegation so that they're aware of any concerns that might impact their constituencies. So, and I may provide written or verbal testimony, just kind of depending. Legislation, it's really dynamic as it's moving through the process. So as I mentioned, it requires some ongoing monitoring and being prepared to respond. Amendments can change things really instantly. Thankfully, most of the bills that are introduced don't pass. The vast majority, in fact, don't pass. And since they have to pass through both chambers and be signed by the governor, the sheer volume actually means that they have to be really focused on their priorities. And so there's just simply not time for everything. And it also means that bills that are controversial, a lot of things that haven't been worked through the process before session convenes, they're a lot less likely to move. So there are a series of deadlines throughout the session. And if bills aren't scheduled to be voted on in time to move through those deadlines, they die. So that's just kind of the nature. This past Friday was another deadline, another benchmark that sealed the fate of another batch of bills. So I'm going to share my screen here. And All right, so this, can you all see my screen? Okay, thanks, Josh. So of those priority bills for which I'm going to provide a status update here, there's really only two that are still actively moving through the process, and that's 803 and 315 at the bottom here. The others just did not make it to a committee vote. And I will just share that the caveat here with these 4 bills, like I mentioned, there are a lot of more bills that we are tracking. These are bills for which OTA was particularly engaged. So let's see. I figured I'd probably go through these 4 bills here. Get down to my descriptions. Okay, so first one here, and I'll just keep it really high level. Just want to share with you, there were 4 bills. Like I said, two are dead, 2 are alive. 803 is a bill that has had strong support. LTD ourselves, we've had 10 catalytic converters stolen from our RideSource vehicles over just this past year. So this bill would actually require that anyone purchasing those for scrap metal, they would have to do so from a commercial seller or the owner of the vehicle for which it was removed. And so LTD and a number of other transit agencies provided support and letters of support both to the House and Senate committees. And we do definitely expect that this bill will pass with strong bipartisan support. House Bill 2482 was opposed by the OTA. It would have interfered with our ability to validate bus fares. So that actually never, it was a little bit controversial. It never received a committee vote and died several months ago. Another bill that died before receiving a committee vote had a lot of opposition, not just from the OTA, but actually garnered quite a bit of opposition from the League of Oregon Cities and a dozen or so individual cities, including both Eugene and Springfield, as well as the River Road Community Organization neighborhood. And that's House Bill 2558, which would have mandated statewide zoning along current and any future bus rapid transit or rail lines. And then the last one I'll go through is House Bill 3115, which is the Speaker's, House Speaker's priority bill. This bill codifies the federal court ruling and puts into Oregon law that sitting, lying, sleeping, or keeping warm or dry outdoors cannot be criminalized. The OTA has been watching this bill really closely for impacts to transit districts and other special districts, given that we do have public property and public facilities. As of right now, we're pretty confident that it would not apply to us, but it's certainly something that we're continuing to watch. And this bill is scheduled for a committee vote in Senate Judiciary next week, and we expect this bill to pass. As I mentioned, it's a big priority of the Speaker, and there's been a lot of work going into this one. So I think I will stop there and see if there's any questions on state stuff before I move into federal and switching gears. And Caitlin, you'll have to call on anyone. I can't quite see any, if there are any questions. Josh has his hand up.
Yeah, I let's see. Well, do you want to just stop sharing your screen, Tiffany?
Yeah.
And so we can just have a conversation that way.
You got it.
Okay.
You don't have a separate federal handout, do you, Tiffany? Because it's just this one, right?
It's just that one. Okay. Yeah, I don't have a federal handout.
Okay. So yeah, so I have a kind of a 2-part comment / question.
Okay.
And so one of the pieces is really about process, and then I'll say a little bit on substance. I understand that you and OTA and lobbyists and intergovernmental affairs people generally have to sort through just an unbelievable morass of bills every year. And so as a volunteer board, we're not going to engage tons of this stuff. But I actually do think that in the future, bills like 2558 should come before our board to discuss. So just as a process note, I think the reason for that is not that we would necessarily end up taking a different position from what was decided without board input, but that it relates directly to board policy and we should have a chance to think through it. So this is the substantive piece. We are, so I think other board members will remember I'm on a DLCD rulemaking advisory committee. I have to get all the syllables out. Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities Rulemaking Advisory Committee. Say that 10 times quickly. And what we're starting to see is that we'll have to start making, some like maybe not always comfortable decisions involving transportation and land use and the way they interact in the coming years in ways that we haven't necessarily done a great job with in the past. So would we have taken a different position on this as a board? I don't know, but I would have wanted us to think about it because we have a policy as a board that involves land use and local jurisdictions. So this kind of touches a policy that we have already passed as a board. That's really the essence of it. The other thing I want to say, you did a good job, Tiffany, mentioning the organizations that were opposed to it, but there were a bunch of organizations in favor of it, like 1,000 Friends, Smart Growth Oregon, I think Sightline Institute was, BEST, I think was involved in this, trying to, talk through this as well. So I again, without sort of second guessing what position we ended up taking, I just want to make sure that we as a board have a chance to wrestle with these things because this land use transportation intersection, especially as it relates to climate and equity outcomes, is going to be really important going forward. So just a nudge for us to talk a little bit more about these like earlier in a future legislative session.
Thank you for that. So the only thing I will just mention, like I said, there were over 4,000 bills. There were a lot of bills related to climate, that related to electrification, related to a number of things that OTA did not engage on. There were bills that I'm very much watching closely. And so I think that, moving forward, I definitely would be open to opportunities of this board to discuss kind of what that might look like. Because I think that for me personally, I think I might be challenged with trying to identify which bills relate to decisions that this board has weighed in on, such as a climate action policy. And so, I think that would be something that might be challenged with. I certainly don't think that you all would be interested in workplace types of legislation that we are watching, things like paid sick leave and things like retirement benefits and things like that. So I think that as just from a process standpoint, I think that I would think that there's some work to be done as far as like how that could be structured and what that would look like. The good news is we have two more years before the next full legislative session. But I think that there's a lot of questions I would have, and I would be really open to that conversation. But again, we also have federal legislation that touches a lot of the policies. And so just trying to figure out where the board wants to plug in, happy to bring back what might help you all figure out where you'd want to be at with that. So
great, thanks.
Poor Emily's trying to say something. I can tell.
Caitlin, you got to call on Abe.
Yeah, Abe has a lot to add. Tiffany, thank you so much for that presentation. I think in the past we've gotten like just here's what's coming up, here's what we're watching, and then if there was anything we wanted to add or have comments on, that made it like a little bit easier of a process to be able to jump on and say, oh, we're actually interested in this also, or you know what, we're not sure why this one's on the list. Yeah. And it's not necessarily for the board, but for the LTD as a district. So maybe that was a way that we could capture that, Josh, without like trying to recreate the wheel.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's actually that hard a process. AJ did something, I think it was about 2 years ago, where we had a long list of bills. It's pretty easy scanning them to see the 80% of them that we're not going to even think about engaging on, and then quick Q&A can narrow the list from there even farther very quickly. So I think we can do that. I'm happy to talk offline about how to do it. But I will just say, like, even just the example you gave, something on electrification, transportation electrification, that's actually not necessarily relevant to us because we're not making or engaging in policy on electrification for other people, but
Right.
we are really interested in land use and transportation interactions. And so like that one would have been, it would have been easier to sort of sift in that case. But let's pick it up next time. And you're right, we have a lot of runway before the next time around.
Definitely. Okay. And I would just say that to be thinking about how that might apply in the federal space, there isn't really a session. It's always happening. So right now it's just a lot of funding and things like that. Not as much policy as so much it is investments and things like that they're talking very high level right now, which I will share with you next if they're but go ahead, Josh.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I mean, the nice thing about the federal piece is that United Front already channels and gives structure to what we're doing on an annual basis. That we might miss some windows as a result, but I think in general, there's something there for that. We don't quite have that for the state. So that's something for us to build just a little bit more of.
Okay. Shall I go on to the federal stuff? It's not nearly as interesting probably right now, but
Can I ask a question, Tiffany?
Of course.
Specifically in this realm, if you have one board member like Josh, who's probably more interested in being engaged with some of this, what type of opportunities exist for Josh to be involved? Because he's involved kind of on these other committees and has knowledge that I would say other board members don't, or interest that other board members don't. What would be a good solution there?
Well, I mean, I see that AJ is unmuted. I'll answer that and I'll let her add to that. I think obviously decisions that if LTD is weighing in because the board has wanted us to take a specific position, it needs to be a board decision. And I think that during those deliberations, when those discussions can happen, certainly Josh has a lot of expertise in certain areas, for sure. I mean, I think everybody does to an extent on things that might be of interest. But again, it would really need to be a board decision. So if we would be taking a position on, say, House Bill 2558 or anything for that matter, I think that that is OTA votes, their board votes on decisions. So it isn't just, let's support this or whatnot. It is a vote and it is a majority vote. And I will be, so far, I mean, we had mostly unanimous votes. There were folks that weren't maybe there for all the votes, but there was no controversy as far as OTA's position on any of the things that they've engaged on. But again, it's a board decision, I would say.
Yeah, and I guess I want to be clear. I was not suggesting that I would make board policy. I was suggesting, I mean, I said very specifically, I think we would find it valuable as a board to talk about some of those things. Like when there's legislation that has some intersection with policies that we've set as a board, that's a good time for us to engage and have a conversation about it. And so that was a good example. 2558 was a good example.
Yeah. Okay.
Did you want to talk at all? Your mic was off for.
I did. I was going to say the same thing Tiffany said, but I think Josh really clarified that he's not speaking as an individual board member. He's actually engaging the board and asking them maybe to talk about that. So I think that provides a lot of clarification about that.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thanks, Tiff. Why don't you move on to the federal part?
I'll just wrap up here with the federal stuff. The federal level, LTD, we're actually engaged a number of different places. Like Josh mentioned, the United Front, which is the cities of Eugene and Springfield, Lane County, LTD, Willamette Lane, and the Springfield School District. And I know Caitlin provided an update last meeting about the work that we had been doing with our virtual annual trip this year. And we met with our congressional delegation, our transportation staff, the FTA, US DOT, Department of Transportation, as well as the Senate Banking Committee, and then lobbyists from two of the other groups that we engage through, which is the American Public Transportation Association, that's kind of a mouthful, APTA, as well as the Bus Coalition. And they have a lobbyist, and actually AJ sits on that board, and I attend those meetings every other week. And so there's a lot of engagement through all of those various different organizations. With the United Front, during those meetings, we shared our priorities, both as LTD's priorities, as well as just our regional United Front priorities. And for us, those two main things were the bidirectional MX lanes on Franklin Boulevard and that project overall, as well as the electrification of our buses and our bus replacement as part of our climate action policy and our fleet procurement goals. So those were like our big messages that we were hammering home on to all of the folks that we talked to, and they were, very receptive to those things. We also had the opportunity to thank our delegation for all of the funding that they've provided through the relief packages. And I know that last month also Christina walked you through the CARES and the CRISA and the ARPA funds, and how, what those packages all were, how those funds need to be obligated and when. CARES and CRISA don't have expiration dates at all. And so those funds, we actually, there's still a lot of unknowns about the pandemic and the impacts, and we haven't actually seen a lot of those even come to fruition. So those funds will certainly be put to good use. And there's also really strong support from this Congress and this administration, and it's got a very aggressive agenda when it comes to substantial investments in transportation and infrastructure and transit. President Biden has proposed a $2.25 trillion American Jobs Plan that essentially doubles federal funding for public transit. And it would, proposing to completely modernize our systems. And as part of that plan, Senate leadership is proposing legislation to authorize $73 billion to shift public transportation systems to zero emission fleets. And these investments, we were already seeing that coming to us. And so they would really have a huge impact, not just to LTD, but to transit and transportation nationwide. And I actually cannot even begin to do it justice how transformational the magnitude of these investments would be being proposed by this administration. LTD recently submitted a couple of projects for funding at the request of Congressman DeFazio, as well as Senators Wyden and Merkley, for member-directed spending, which is something that they've brought back in this new administration. And so those requests were for electric buses, and then we asked for funding for the Trip Planner mobile wallet app. And for those requests, we submit projects that fit the criteria that they're asking for, but that also are part of what the board has adopted in the CIP. So, we use the CIP as our guiding, to guide how, what types of projects and where we can plug in with funding. So we were notified that Congressman DeFazio has included funding for an electric bus in one of our asks. And so we are in the process of drafting a very kind thank you for him. And so we've articulated that, individually, but we certainly want to, kind of make that known. And we will know more about the Senate side in a few weeks. So that's really new. That just happened last week. And those asks are still haven't been determined yet. So we are going to continue to work at the federal level to ensure that agencies like LTD of our size have a voice, and our congressional delegation understands our needs and our community, and to ensure that, the projects and the initiatives that we're seeking to get funded are actually going to get funded. So high level, I know, but I'm happy to answer questions on federal stuff or anything else at this point as well before I sign off. So let me know. crickets.
I don't see any hands up, but does anyone have any questions or feedback?
No.
Oh, Josh, I'm so glad you spoke up. We haven't heard from you at all tonight. So thank you for finally asking a question.
Thank you. I really, I finally felt safe, Caitlin. I appreciate how you.
All right, go ahead.
Space for me. Member-directed funding is definitely the best euphemism of the evening. I had not heard earmarks described that way. Thank you for sharing that, Tiffany.
Well, it's a euphemism.
But I had also not heard that we got another electric bus. That's spectacular. I mean, I just want to say that's really good news, and it's not surprising that, DeFazio has been behind that, and this administration is too. I just want to say that I'm really excited to hear you bring back news from discussions at the federal level, just because there is so much serious discussion in this transportation department about things that will sort of potentially accelerate transformations that we have already talked about here at the board level and throughout LTD. So it's exciting times. I agree.
Yes, I agree, and I will have to provide a caveat that it's not a done deal, because obviously DeFazio is submitting that as part of a bill that has to pass. But I think that's a strong indication that when the chairman of the committee is putting a request for our bus in there, that's nice. So I'll keep you all posted. I'll let you know when we know more about the rest of those, and keep tracking that, all of that legislation that's, essentially all part of the American Jobs Plan. So, okay. Well, if there's nothing else, then I will bid you all adieu and have a wonderful rest of your meeting. I'll be on the sidelines watching. So
thank you, Tiffany. Awesome
you guys.
job.
Thank you.
Awesome. So we are going to have our last presentation of the evening, and it's the service update. So I see Tom was here. Oh, there you are. You moved on my screen. So Tom is here. So good to see you, Tom. Cosette, thank you so much for joining us this evening. You guys are our grand finale, per se, for presenters. So we're so excited to see what you're going to talk about this evening. So welcome, and I'll hand it off to you. Tom, you're muted, my friend.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I wasn't muted. My mic was away. So thank you. And tonight I'm going to provide an overview of the plans we have for FY22 service. But first I wanted to have Cosette I'd like her to provide an overview of the communication plan for welcoming back riders. So Cosette, do you want to?
Yeah, you bet. Thanks so much, Tom. So again, I'm really happy to be here. Always happy to play cleanup. Happy to be here, and really excited to have some new board members. So welcome. I'm Cosette Reese. I'm the Director of Customer and Specialized Services. I oversee our customer service, accessible services, and marketing and communications work groups. And I appreciate the opportunity to provide a brief update on our ridership campaign and communications. As you may recall, at our February board meeting, I provided information about our ridership campaign, including communications since the pandemic began. And this really focused on what we're doing to provide the facts. So communicating to our riders the impacts of COVID, including LTD's immediate and evolving response to keep our customers, employees, and communities safe, including procedures and protocols, and also service changes. That we're continuing to follow the board-led health first approach, following the guidelines and requirements of our federal, state, and local public health officials, and that we're continuing to communicate this information through multiple platforms. We're continuing today, primarily including digital channels, media releases, signage, bus announcements, and other customer and community channels. I also introduced our COVID campaign. So in November of 2020, LTD launched the Don't Invite COVID, Follow the 4 campaign. And as I shared, LTD took a leadership role to steel our community and change behaviors through a fresh and clever campaign. This campaign has been refreshed monthly and pushed out broadly, reaching out through billboards, bus advertising, digital media, and many other channels. We also reached out to align about 30 private and public partners who we meet with regularly, and we share our assets, and they utilize our assets of this campaign through their own channels to provide an even greater and broader reach. So in that presentation, I also outlined that our strategy would include preparation for a return to ridership pivot when the time is right. I'm here tonight to share with you that we're moving toward that return to ridership campaign, which is really exciting, light at the end of the tunnel. There's still a lot of unknowns. In June, we're beginning that pivot to introduce 2 new characters who are everyday people who are champions of the elimination of COVID by promoting good practices and, spoilers, delivering a final blow to our COVID character through vaccination. We view this as a transitional campaign toward that return to ridership opportunity. And as we've often heard over the last year, these are unprecedented times. We have unprecedented challenges and opportunities. We live in a changed world, and it's going to continue to change. With this in mind, our marketing and communications team is working with Terrell Group, who's been working with us on the COVID campaign, on the Return to Ridership campaign as we speak. When the time is right, we will complete the communication pivot to launch the next phase to build community confidence and welcome returning riders and encourage new riders. In addition to a strong media campaign, we'll continue our collaboration with those partners that I mentioned earlier to help our community re-engage with strong influence toward using public transportation to do so. So we'll be providing additional information in the near future, but I just wanted to take this opportunity to provide this update, let you know that we're working on it, and let you know that we'll be back. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Cosette.
Thanks, Tom.
So I heard the Cosette use the word pivot, and I was going to start off tonight saying we're entering a pivotal period in terms of ramping up our service to serve the region's recovery. And I want to reflect on a quote that I recently read in the New Yorker, Canadian poet. He said, "Let's work as if we live in the early days of a better nation." And what I really like about that as a planner is it's both anxiously hopeful, but also confident about moving into what we're facing in the future. And so as we think about this, things are opening up. We know that the impacts of the pandemic will affect both the speed of the recovery and how people travel. And for us, this means that there are uncertainties in how we move forward. Who will be riding? How might the mobility needs be shifting as more people are working at home, for example? And of course, from an operational standpoint, what kinds of load limits are there going to be? How are those going to ease over time? So those are all factors that we've considered in putting together our plan for the next fiscal year. And in that context, I want to go over 3 things with the board this evening. The first is an overview of how the 6 modes of transit that LTE operates have fared over the last 15 months. I want to do a quick review of the status of some of the key elements of our fixed route operations that you've been monitoring along with us over that period of time. And then talk about our plans for the service restoration over the next fiscal year. And so to start with, I'm going to share my screen. And going to do it this way. Okay. So the first graphic I want to just review, and I'm doing it from a high level because I want you to see all 6 of these modes of travel at the same time. And some of you, we certainly haven't in our regular reports on ridership to the board over the last year talked about the 6 modes of travel. And just to reference that, NTD, the National Transit Database that we are required to provide our information to on a monthly basis, tracks what we do in terms of what they call the different modes of travel. And so we happen to have 6 of them. And I'm going to briefly describe them. And you can see some similarities and differences, and we'll talk more about those in detail. The first one at the upper left there is that MBDO, that means motorized bus directly operated. And then the MX is rapid bus directly operated. And you can see this is comparing since January of 2020, what our what our service levels have been as a percent of pre-COVID. So that would have been the January 2020 level, as well as the ridership as a percentage of that pre-COVID number. So it gives you in a glance kind of how things have gone. And again, we'll get into more detail. The next one, Oak Ridge and Florence, that's motorized bus purchase transportation. So those are services that we contract for. The Oak Ridge one, that's the Diamond Express, and Florence is the Rhodea Express. And again, you can see they're a little bit different than what you see in the Metro service, and we'll explain why that is. Vanpool is probably the most different from all of these. And again, that's considered purchase transportation from an NTD standpoint. I think this is probably pretty understandable, but we'll talk more about it in the larger version of these. And then the Ride Source fleet, that's demand responsive purchase transportation. Very similar, I think, to what our fixed routes looked like. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then Medicaid taxi, that's the demand response taxi in NTD's language, and looks a little bit different from Ride Source, but we can talk about why that is. So then I want to move to, let's see, the next one would be this one. So like I said, we wanted to talk a little bit more about these so you could see them in detail. And you can see, again, the blue, the color here, and the green are the ridership levels as a percent of pre-COVID levels. You can see with respect to the fixed route service, the non-MX service, we had that steep decline at the end of March, and the ridership's been gradually turning up. Overall, our ridership has gone up about 53% since the dip there in April. But that's just to give you some context. That's still 63% below our pre-COVID ridership, as seen in February of 2020. So that's kind of the scale of things there. Very similar pattern for MX ridership. Again, a little bit more robust with respect to having about 40% as opposed to about 35% of pre-COVID levels, and that's to be expected. That's been our most frequent service in the region during this period of time, so that's kind of understandable. Again, looking at the Florence and Oak Ridge services, you might ask, well, why are we operating about 100% of that service, and it looks like the ridership's about at that 40 to 50% level. And that's because there are far fewer trips that we operate for each of these. So it'd be difficult to cut a trip without really affecting someone's essential trip making. And with respect to the Florence, the Rhodea Express, we've actually been operating for the last year, I think, with one vehicle. And so it really didn't make sense to cut those services. So that explains when you see this, why we're operating at that level. Like I said, Vanpool clearly didn't fare well in the COVID periods, and it's understandable, right? A lot of our Vanpools are going up to Corvallis, Salem, and people don't want to spend a lot of time with other people during this period of time. in a small van for that long. So again, that's understandable, but we also expect that to increase. Again, like I said up front, we're watching, looking at what researchers are saying about what we should expect from transit with respect to potential shifts in how people work. But we'll be following that as well. Then again, you can see a little bit more up close here, RideSource and Medicaid travel. RideSource has not quite met the levels of ridership as say MX, but it has been pretty steady. And again, you might recall John Allen talking about the fact that they were encouraging people not to ride. To really just take essential trips. And so, in my mind, looking at this pattern here, people have pretty much done that. And we expect that as things start to open up, we'll see more trips being taken. But right now, people are kind of hunkered down. The Medicaid taxi trips, again, that's been right in there in that 50% level. The reason why you see the service levels kind of matching the ridership is, as the name implies, it's demand responsive. One of the things John Allen, I talked to him this afternoon about these figures. He indicated that again, as you might expect, shared rides on both RideSource and Medicaid taxi are down. And that, again, that's understandable. So there's a lot of things that you can see are going to change as again, we start to open up. It's safer to take trips out for some of the vulnerable populations that use those services. So I wanted to transition again to quickly reviewing. And you, some of you, I know there are a couple of you who haven't seen this report before, but this is the report that we were using. I'm not going to go through all the slides that we had, but I did want to highlight some of the things that we've seen. So these are views that are basically a month, looking at a month of service. Again, like I said before, hovering around pretty consistently around 13,000 daily boardings. So these are weekday boardings. And then for those of you who aren't familiar with this, our service levels and ridership are lower on Saturdays and Sundays. And that's why you see these kind of regular dips on all these charts. Again, you can see here, the MX service is carrying roughly 45% of our trips on a weekday basis. And as I've indicated before, we were tracking boardings on trips ending after 8:30. Those are late. That's the later operations that we have to ensure that we were providing that necessary service for people that are likely, if they're riding transit after 8:30 during this period of time, that's probably an essential trip. And so we've been encouraged over this time to see fairly robust ridership on those trips after 8:30. Just to really, I kept this in. I'm not going to go through any of this really, but just to show you, illustrate that during the last 12 months or so, we've made 6 changes to service. And again, you may not be familiar, but we do typically 3 bids, they're called bids as service changes. We do 3 bids a year. But we did 6 to just adapt to the conditions, both to reduce our service initially, but then gradually build that service back up. And as you can see here, our summer bid is going to start on June 13th. I'll talk a little bit more about that right away here. One of the things that we were tracking were overloads. And just to remind you, back in November, we had about 1.2% of our total trips were overload. So in other words, above the levels that we were trying to manage to, that were set by the CDC and others. And that's gradually been able to manage that down. And so this last month, we were at about 0.3% of those trips or overloads. And so, we think we're doing a pretty good job in that regard. One of the things that we do in transit is we think about the peaking of our riders, like what are the times where there's going to be more, because that requires us, particularly you can see here, these are the pre-COVID weeks before we started dropping down in our ridership during the COVID period. But you can see very sharp peaks here in the morning. And these are commutes largely taking place during this time, and then a really sharp peak in the afternoon. And I've gone over this before, but I'll just remind folks, this very sharp peak, you can see it happens around 3 p.m. That's actually school, high school getting out and riding the bus. And then, of course, students at the U of O even have a schedule that's going to drive up the peak ridership. And then, of course, the commute home is that 5 p.m. time frame. So those you can see where we have some peaks, and that means that we're pulling out additional buses during those times to provide that service. So we really try and manage to make sure that we have the buses we need when we need them. You can see here, though, during this period, and this front, the brown curve here is just the last week, and you can see it's very smooth. There is some peaking that's happening. You can see kind of the similar patterns, but definitely not as sharp as we expect to see again. At some point. And then you can see it tapers off fairly quickly here in the evening. This chart here gives you a really good cross-section of our ridership. You can see how we dropped precipitously down here to the beginning of the COVID. And again, we've ramped up over time. And that, some of these lower points are actually in the summer where we have lower ridership. And so that's what that looks like. And then really quickly, some of you are familiar with the ride source charts we've been showing you. We look at call volume as an indication of demand, and then the actual trip taking by ride sources is in this figure here. And again, this has been relatively steady. You might recall the other view over the total last 15 months. And again, John wanted me to emphasize that we've encouraged people to take only essential trips, and really that service has been pretty steady at these levels for that time. So I'm going to stop sharing now and just talk a little bit about what it is we're planning to do in fiscal year 22. One of the issues that obviously we've been concerned about is what's the university going to do? What's LCC going to do? And we've been in contact with them over these last few months. Actually, during the COVID period, we've been talking on and off with Dave Reeser at the U of O and his folks. But what we're hearing from them and talking to them, and this is what we put into our fall plan, was that they expect about 97% in-person classes. I'm sorry, it's 90% in in-person classes as compared to 97% in person back in 2019. So just to give you a sense, there's slightly fewer classes that'll be in person, but most of them will be in person. The other thing that was good news was it looked like their registration was similar to the 2019 enrollment, so fairly robust for this period. So I know they're looking forward to having things starting to get back to whatever normal is going to look like. faced with similar uncertainties, LCC's estimated between 65 and 75% of pre-COVID enrollment. Another thing to keep in mind is what we've noticed in our own ridership over the years, where there have been economic downturns, you see community college enrollment go up, and as the economy is recovering, you see it go down. So we may see some of that happening over the next year. And then School District 4J has indicated they're planning to have 100% in-person classes starting in 2021. We expect the other two school districts in the metro area to have the same thing. And so the service increase I mentioned that's scheduled for June 13th, the summer bid. Again, anticipating like we have in past summers, the U of O is out of session. There's not a lot of the typical ridership that you see, that the schools aren't, the high schools aren't generating a lot of ridership. We're not putting as much service out. We're not restoring 100% of what we had pre-COVID, but that's not what we were doing during the summer anyway. So we'll be at about 80% of, I'm sorry, the summer bid's going to get us up to 85% of pre-COVID service levels. And then moving to the fall bid will take place in the middle of September. And that would take us up to 90%. And a lot of that increase is the U of O service that we provide, U of O and LCC. So routes like the 85, or I'm sorry, the 81 and the 82 are coming back. And then in the winter bid, which would be February 2022, we'll be adding service to bring us up to 96% of pre-COVID levels. And then, of course, heading into the new fiscal year, assuming everything is going swimmingly, we will be back up to 100% or more, depending on conditions at that time. So that's what I had for you tonight, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Questions? Susan, Michelle, Dawn, Emily. Just want to make sure I'm not skipping over you guys this evening.
Come on, someone asked just one question before. Come on.
Josh, do you have a question? That's my question.
Of course he has a question.
Michelle, that does not count.
Oh, sorry.
Actually, why don't I ask one short one and then I'll save my others. But Tom, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about RideSource. Like, I mean, this is the people whom we serve with RideSource, we know are the people who are maybe most vulnerable and most needy during the pandemic. And we really wrestled with this. We didn't want people, taking unnecessary risks, but we really want to serve them. I'm wondering if you can say a little bit about why that, as things have gotten safer, though maybe the data don't quite go out far enough. We don't have April and May in here.
I was going to say that, yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say that this only goes through April. And I think, we're seeing a lot of things happening in May. And so, and I know I see Cosette here. I know I talked to John earlier. He is available as well. But Cosette, do you want to add some context?
Sure, I can provide a little bit of context. So very similar to our fixed route service, we've been encouraging people to take essential only trips. But essential only trips, it's up to the user to decide what's essential only trip. We've also put a hold on some of our services that we're unable to provide necessarily safely. So for instance, the RideSource shopper, and that generates a lot of trips. So you're not seeing those trips now in the RideSource service. So the RideSource shopper we're not providing now because it's being provided with a large bus and we're cramming people in there. We don't really have the ability to provide that. We don't have extra buses or the ability to provide that in a safe way. So as we begin to bring back some of those services, you'll see some of the ridership go up. There's some pent up demand for that. Some of those folks are taking those trips still on more individual rides, but a lot of the folks are just not taking those trips. But again, no one is missing critical appointments. Even when we're not operating, for instance, with Memorial Day, even when we're not typically operating our ADA paratransit service, we're still providing trips for those critical appointments, so dialysis appointments and other appointments. So no one is missing those appointments. We're making sure that folks are getting to those appointments. You also have to realize that a lot of the folks who utilize riders or who utilize RideSource are going to be the last ones to feel comfortable coming back. So I expect, and as the weather starts getting nicer and people are able to get outside, I expect we will see that ridership will climb.
But if I can just, that triggered something that John had mentioned too, is that I don't have a sense of the proportion, but there are a number of doctor's visits that were happening virtually as well during this period.
That's helpful. Thank you. Yeah, it's just one of those things where sometimes there were times where we wanted ridership to go down for people to be safe, but for people to be safe and healthy long-term, we really don't want people losing access to RideSource. So I just wanted to understand that. And so that's helpful for now, and we'll take a look at the data going forward.
All right, thank you. And any other questions? Great. Well, thank you, Tom and Cazette, for taking the time. Wait, what?
Wait, no. I have a couple of other things. Sorry, actually, yeah. I was just like.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were done. My apologies. Go ahead.
Done. Come on. Okay, but I will try to keep this fairly quick. And Susan and Michelle especially, please pitch in if you have other if what I say sparks other questions. Wait, Emily, you just reappeared. Does that mean you have something? Okay, just checking. So a couple things. I will just make my standard reminder because this is recorded and the public sees it. Transit is safe. With the precautions that we have in place, transit is incredibly safe. There have been no outbreaks linked to transit globally when agencies are taking the precautions that we are taking, especially with mask wearing and reduced occupancy. Cleaning matters a little. Ventilation is of course important, but like the required masks and reduced occupancy, transit is safe, and we need to keep reminding people of that. I just want to say, in that vein, amazing job reducing the overload percentage. I don't know if this is obvious to everyone taking a look at the graphs, but this is really a tribute to our planners and service planning efforts, because to have the ridership recover like that and to deal with these weird patterns during the day, and to have figured out how to get overloads down to such a small percentage is great. So thank you so much to the agency for getting that done. That's really a big deal. We expressed a lot of concern about that earlier in the pandemic, and now to see that like below 0.5% is spectacular.
Can I just say, I mean, I never want to let go of kudos for the service planners, but operations did a fantastic job kind of managing through this process, and I can't let that go without saying something.
Yeah, no, thank you to everyone involved with that. I don't pretend to know all the moving parts. That's definitely not my job, but thank you for being specific about that, Tom. It's a really big deal, and it just means that we've really tried to figure out how not to restore a lot of service that was unnecessary, but restore service that was needed, but not have people on crowded buses. And it feels like you all have really threaded the needle. So thank you for that. For the next time that we look at this stuff, I would ask for the following metrics to be there, because, and I'll just list three really quickly, because we had started to develop a little bit of shared understanding and shared language around a few things. So we had talked about an annual service hours equivalent, just sort of seeing that unfold over time, and we've lost track of that a little bit. It would be great if we could see the extent to which we're putting resources toward ridership versus coverage. I know that we're going to do another comprehensive operations assessment. I'm sure that we're going to be thinking about those trade-offs from Jarrett Walker's work as we did before. So it'd be great to sort of bring that back so we can have that in mind. And then it would be really good to juxtapose our service levels with what AJ really, like, sort of, I think, helpfully forced us to confront about a year ago, nearly a year ago, maybe 9 months ago, which is to think about our service levels relative to our sustainable level of funding, right? So we don't have money for endless transit service, and our cost structure has changed a few times during the pandemic, with cleaning or whatever. Some of that stuff is surely working itself out, but it would be helpful to see that so we have a sense of, how close are we to spending, what we can in a way that we can support over time. So those are my hopes for next time. But otherwise, this is great and super helpful to see, Tom and Cosette. Thank you so much.
Sure, and I'll just respond a little bit. Part of the sustainable level of service, that's something that I've certainly been interested in since I started at LTD. And I know that one of the things that's going to help that is the presence of the long-range financial plan. So that'll be basically a way of really thinking about that in a more strategic fashion. But yeah. Any other questions?
Michelle?
Not really a question, more of a comment. So as a new member to the board, I don't know what I don't know, and I don't always know what questions I should be asking. So I just appreciate all of the presentations that we get to see and the information that you provide us to kind of help us learn our way through this new world of transit. And maybe someday I'll be able to keep up with Josh, but right now I'm still kind of in learning mode.
Very good.
Expect you to pass me. Don't just keep up. Lap me, maybe.
Well, there's so much I could say after that comment, Michelle, and I won't. Let's go ahead and move on, and then thank you again, Tom and Cosette. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And answering all the questions. So let's go ahead and move on to our last agenda item of the evening. So written reports. And I just wanted to open the floor to see if anyone had any questions, what was in their board packet. Okay, great. Well, I am going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting. And as always, appreciate the conversation, appreciate your participation. I just want to reiterate, I am very sorry that I missed the SPC update and apologize to Leah for that, and Marianne as well. So I will make sure to not do that again. And feel free, anyone, if you realize that I missed something, please just jump in and correct me. So at 7:17, I'm going to adjourn the meeting and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you, everyone. Good night.